Hello everyone. In this podcast, we are going to discuss about World Trade Organization issues, challenges, and the way ahead. WTO or the World Trade Organization is the only global organization dealing with the rules of trade between nations. It is different from its predecessor called GATT, General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs, on the basis that while GATT was only for trade in goods, but WTO not only covers trade in goods but also cover trade in services, protection of intellectual property rights, and trade related investment measures. WTO currently has a membership of 164 nations. Now, why WTO is important? The WTO stimulates global trade, thus economic growth and employment. It reduces the cost of doing business, improving productivity, and most of all, it is improving transparency by promoting good governance in trade-related practices. If we talk about the current geopolitical world, its importance is increased exponentially due to the effect of good trade policies in peace and stability of the world. It can be a forum where even adversaries have to sit on the table due to economic constraints. So, it is fundamental to promoting global stability. Now we will dive into the challenges faced by WTO one by one. The first of these challenges is the paralysis of the dispute settlement body. The dispute settlement body consists of all WTO members, is responsible for resolving the responsible cases. The WTO members appoint a panel of experts to consider the case and accept or reject its ruling based on the consensus. So here we have to point out that the WTO works on a consensus based model where consensus of each and every member is important. When the panel of experts appointed by the WTO members, panel's ruling is heard by 3 members of a 7-member appellate body. Here, each member have a 4-year term who are experts in international law and trade. Here, this process came to a halt due to dispute over appointment of new judges of a 7-member body. Here, the point to be noted out is the appellate body must have a minimum of 3 members to hear disputes. The reason being the United States have vetoed all new judges, rendering this dispute settlement process unnecessary, and it came to a grinding halt. The second challenge is the self-designation rule. The WTO allows its countries to self-designate as developing and developed countries, avoiding committing of opening markets. Now, why would want a country to designate itself as a developing country? Because developing countries get concessions in opening markets and can practice preferential trade practices. This is why the USA has accused India and China, who abuse this practice despite being 2nd and 5th largest economies of the world. And the USA thus have vetoed all the new appointments to the panel's appellate body. Now, third and the foremost reason is lack of consensus. As we all now know that the WTO works on a consensus-based model, especially in e-commerce sector and data localization agreements, where the developed economies have clear advantage. They are forcing some developing and least developed countries to open their digital economy part. When the consensus is not reached, the countries like Japan, USA and Australia developed a separate mechanism without the consensus of all WTO members, which is now being called as Digital Economy Partnership Agreement. Now the fourth challenge faced is the return of the protectionism across the world. After COVID, high tariffs and protectionist policy are coming around the world. The reason behind is the absence of trust between nations. For example, USA and China are right now practicing a trade war where they are increasing tariff on each other's products. The fifth problem is China. China is the prime example and one of the reasons of the failure of World Trade Organization. The World Trade Organization has failed to curb the China's state-driven capitalism and market economy. The companies are forced to share sensitive technology before investing in China, thus violating the trade-related investment measure and trade-related intellectual property rules. The sixth point of contention is the TRIPS waiver. India and South Africa were calling for TRIPS waiver on the treatment of COVID-19 drugs and the vaccines, which was opposed by the developed countries, citing the commercial interest of the pharma companies, despite being the most of the money that went into research and developing of that particular vaccines was from public exchequer. And the last point of challenge to the WTO faced is its failure to check unfair labor practices and minimum wage requirement, which put most of the countries in clear disadvantage who have better labor laws protection and better minimum wage. For example, China has the worst labor law practices and the lowest minimum wage in all of the countries, and thus it is able to reduce its cost of production and thus gaining the clear advantage in cost of production and economies of scale. Now we have to come to the point that what is the way ahead. The first and the foremost is the reform in the WTO architecture. Currently, the Japan, USA and the European Union are pushing it and they are discussing the WTO reform. But here the problem is that developing countries are not involved in the discussion regarding the reform in the world WTO. Here, India could take the advantage and it could lead the way by utilizing the goodwill it has with all the three members, the USA, Japan and the European Union. Second point of the reform should be the free trade of the medical goods. As we all know that the good health and well-being is the sustainable development goal number 3, and because no country is the self-reliant in the terms of medicine and equipment manufacturing, so we all depend on each other. Thus, the trade in the medical goods should be free of all the tariffs, and it will promote the inclusivity at the global level where the developed countries could handhold the least developed countries or the countries who are lagging behind in health outcomes. The third point of the reform should be the ease of trade in environmental goods. As we all know that this century is the crucial for fight against the climate crisis. But at the same time, we have to make sure that we improve the capacities of the least developed countries or small island developing states before enforcing the sustainability rules across the world. For example, there has been negotiation going in the WTO about the reduction of the fish subsidies, which are harmful for the environment. But at the same time, the fish subsidies are important for the livelihood of the various communities who are living in the coastal areas. Also, liberalizing the trade in the environmental goods will reduce the cost of transition and also will promote the investment in research and development of climate-friendly products. The fifth point of the reform should be the digital trade. It should be modeled on the lines of agreement on agriculture, where developed and developing countries are treated differently, and also at the same time focusing on the developing capacities and creating a level playing field in the e-commerce sector. So now we have first discussed the challenges faced by WTO. I will repeat them one by one again. The first challenge is paralysis of dispute settlement. The second is the self-designation rule that allow countries to self-designate themselves as developed or developing country. The third is the lack of consensus among the WTO members. The fourth is the return of protectionism across the world. The fifth and the prime example of the problem with the WTO is the China. The sixth is the TRIPS waiver where the medical supplies are hampered. The seventh is the unfair labor practices. The World Trade Organization is critical for sustainable and inclusive global environment. It is also fundamental to the conflict-free post-pandemic world. Thus, it is paramount that this organization is revamped. It is important for the peaceful global order. Thank you.